Hello everyone! Today I will be featuring the Tier 10 Soviet cruiser, affectionately called the battleship Moskva. Now, the reason why this is often called battleship Moskva is because, well, it's considered well armored. If you look at it like this, it kind of looks like a battleship, and this amazing camo is of course only available on the Russian server, not on any other server yet. And it's got terrible concealment, and it's got a pretty damn impressive health pool of 65.4k health. Now, I say people consider it well armored, and that's because it's really not as well armored as people make it out to be. People joke about Battleship Moskva, but it only has certain aspects of the ship that are actually well armored. It actually has a lot of squishy parts, which is why people often overestimate their survivability in this thing, and that is why you often see, especially new Moskva players, get killed extremely quickly, because they think they can get away with a lot of things they've seen in vids and commentaries and whatever, without anyone actually pointing out that there are very specific parts you need to angle against the opponent. Now, first thing first, there's a tier 10 carrier, there's a lot of tier 10s in this game. I pop my defensive AA, it might seem like I'm popping it from very far away, but if you run the AA module and AFT, you can actually reach an insane 8.2 km range on the anti-air. That of course means that this aura around you that panics the planes is absolutely massive, and you're actually quite good at shooting down planes when defensive is active. In fact, if you go manual AA, you're one of the best plane killers in the game, by far. It's quite terrifying, in fact. The guns, of course, the guns are quite infamously fast. It's both called because of the penetration, stellinium shells, but also because the shell velocity is extremely impressive, which means hitting DDs at long distances is very easy, as you can see multiple times in this vid. But it of course comes with downsides. The concealment is abysmal. You got a 13.8 km concealment, and that of course means that pretty much everyone can outspot you. In fact, every single tier 10 battleship running concealment build outspots you. I know, that sounds ridiculous. How can a Grosso Corfos have better stealth than this thing? How can a Montana have better stealth? But that's just the way it is. It has a 13.8 km concealment, so everything outspots you. You will not outspot anything. I still recommend a concealment build because you do want to be able to disengage, because most of the time you will be playing. This is a cruiser that is certainly played at medium to long ranges, and you certainly do want to be able to disengage when need be. Now you notice I'm shooting AP at very long distances. That's of course because this ship has the best tier 10 cruiser AP penetration, and that is why you get away with shooting a lot of AP at pretty much everything. In fact, you know that I overpenned the Des Moines. That gives you an idea. Now, going back to the armor that I mentioned, that people tend to consider this ship a lot more armored than it actually is. Well, the Citadel armor is actually only 155mm, so your broadside is only 155, and if that doesn't sound impressive, it's because it's really not that impressive. The Des Moines has 152, Zhao has 152, so we're talking 3mm more of broadside armor. In return, the Citadel is flat. It starts at your very first turret and it goes all the way back to the back turret. It pretty much covers your entire ship, and it's pretty much halfway up the waterline, or halfway from the waterline up to the hull, or to the deck. So you got a lot of Citadel to hit, and it's not particularly well armored. And on a ship this big, it translates to a very large Citadel. That's why you tend to see devastating strikes and such on Moskvas that give a broadside, because there's a lot, you can pretty much hit anywhere around the broadside and you will probably be Citadeling this thing. So that's one of the reasons why the ship is not as tanky as people think it is. Another reason is the fact that the bow armor and the stern armor is actually only 25mm thick. If that sounds low, it's because it's very low. In fact, it's among the lowest of all the cruisers. Even the Des Moines, which is considered extremely squishy, has a 27mm bow armor and stern as well. And ships like Zhao and Hindenburg, I think, no, Zhao has 25 as well, but Hindenburg, for example, has 27. So you cannot charge nose in towards a Bismarck or a Tirpitz because they can overmatch you. That's how thin the bow armor is. They can actually overmatch your armor. A brief break here, because this kind of shows off the AP on this ship. I am a bit high, I think, so I'm getting Citadels. It's a bit hard to see his waterlines as he's hiding behind the island. He is 13.5, 13.6 km away, but that certainly does not stop the Moskva. You can never give this much broadside to the Moskva. The Moskva is in fact one of the best cruiser killers in the game, and that's simply because the AP combined with the dispersion is devastatingly potent, as our Des Moines buddy here finds out. He's trying to accelerate, he's trying to angle in, but it's too late at this point. My next volley is already in the air, and you can see that pinpoint accuracy and the devastating effect these shells have. Going back to the armor though, 25mm bow and stern means going full nose in, sailing straight away, leads to some very nasty penetrations. Of course, the elevated Citadel also means that if you charge nose in, there's a high chance you get Citadel straight through the nose. And this is something to keep in mind, and this is something people underestimate. When I say people to angle their Moskva, they think it means go straight nose in. No, you never want to go straight nose in. If you go perfectly nose in towards an enemy target, the only thing they have to shoot at is your nose. And battleships overmatch it. So you don't want to end up in that situation. Now, the reason it's considered tanky is because the belt, or the upper broadside, is 50mm, and the deck is also 50mm. This means that it shatters an exceptional amount of HE shells coming your way, and battleship AP pens from range are pretty rare. In fact, you don't tend to eat those random massive pens. Like for example, the Des Moines sailing around in the open, it has a 27mm upper belt, so you can eat a lot of random pens on the upper belt, and basically you chunk it for 15 to 20k, even though you don't get a Citadel. And that doesn't really happen to the Moskva because of this very strong deck armor and upper belt armor. So that's why if you are angled, not perfectly nose in, but baiting the enemy into shooting your belt and superstructure, deck armor and so forth, you tend to bounce a lot of shells. And that's why it's considered extremely tanky. But keep in mind the weaknesses. I feel like people have oversold the whole tankiness a bit too much without pointing out the weaknesses, and that's why I see a lot of new Moskva players really struggle to make this ship work, because they tend to eat a lot of these big pens. Here, of course, shooting HE, it's across a Kurfürst, but he's giving broadside, so I switch to AP, and I only have one fire on him. I'm hoping to get a second one, but if he gives this much broadside, it's probably better to just switch to this extremely well-penetrating AP. In fact, the only ship that comes close to the long-range pen of the Moskva is the Henry IV. But even the Henry IV can't really compete with the pen this ship has at long ranges. In fact, you can Citadel like battleships like North Carolinas. You can Citadel them almost across the map without too many issues. If they give you broadside, switch to AP. One of my favorite tactics is actually using AP on carriers, because they tend to underestimate you and give broadside because they're expecting HE. And then you switch to AP and you actually deal massive damage at range. Hitting some damage, but the heal heals me a ton. Angling away, of course. Remember that the bow and the stern are massive, so you don't really want to eat those shells on it. Grosse Kurfürst, of course, has no issues overmatching them both. But I keep kiting, I keep hammering him. Every time he shoots, I angle away. Every time he reloads, I just hammer him with HE. Non-stop, constant harassment. Looking at the map, of course, we have lost control of A completely. And we kind of had a guy detonate on our team, which was pretty unfortunate. But I'm just kiting. I don't want to push in there alone, because they have a DD down there, they have the Missouri, they have the Kurfürst, they have a Bismarck. That's a lot of battleships. So I could push in aggressively, but first I need to get rid of the Kurfürst. That's too much firepower, too much of a threat against me. He gets too overeager at shooting me, tunnel visions at targeting me all the time, he keeps turning to shoot me and so forth, and he ends up grounding and eating torpedoes, and even the DD smoking him up cannot save him at this point, because I forced this repair earlier, so he floods to death. So now we actually have the kill that I wanted. The tier 10 battleship is gone. Now the Moskva is actually a lot tankier when you get to go nose in than when kiting away. And the simple reason for that is that it's a lot easier to bait the shells coming your way into hitting your deck and your tanky broadside armor when you're sailing towards them than it is when you're sailing away. Noodaloy pops up, 14 km, it looks like, well, 13.5, it looks like a long distance, but once again, this excellent accuracy, these incredible railguns, the Moskva doesn't have too many issues actually landing these shells. That is, of course, provided my aim wasn't potato or my dispersion screwed me over. He should disengage. I think he's realizing now that he really needs to disengage. There are certain cruisers that you shouldn't fight in DDs, even gunboats, like Tashkent, Kaba, and Moskva is like the #1. Out of all the cruisers that you can take on, Moskva is the very last you should be fighting as a gunboat. You absolutely want to be nowhere near this guy. Now the radar, of course, 11.7 km range, 25-second duration. Sadly, I do not have the incredibly powerful radar duration module on my Russian account, which I'm playing right now. But if you have the radar module, the radar actually lasts 35 seconds. And in this case, a 35-second radar would probably be enough to finish this guy off. And you can see my radar is about to run out here, and I will not be able to kill him. Missouri, he is giving a lot of broadside, so I'm tempted to switch to AP here. Note the angle that I'm sailing. I want him to try to blap my broadside, because that's where I can tank the shells. I do turn in when he shoots, and I want that angled broadside to be eating those shells. 7.6, considering we have 65k health total, that's not too bad. He angles completely now, so I switch away from AP, no point wasting shells. And if he goes nose in, you can just shoot straight at the nose with the HE, and you will do very consistent damage, as you can see here. No fires, unfortunately, but I doubt he'll be able to do much damage anymore, and he's almost certainly going to die. We have a fire, another volley coming in. Once again we angle. The turret takes most of the hits. The turret phases are actually quite tanky for the Moskva. Des Moines, for example, has something like 203mm armor on the turret phase. The Moskva has 300. So, while this ship is quite squishy when you hit the weak parts, if it's angled correctly, it is extremely tanky. And that's really what it comes down to. Focus firing the torpedo bombers, that's why I'm not turning in towards them, because they are focus fired. With defensive AA active, he's going to struggle to get a proper drop off, because this ship has too much AA power with defensive AA active. And I'm finally catching up to their carrier, which is trying to hide behind the island. I shoot a volley towards the Udaloy that we briefly saw, and I'm taking a wide angle around this corner, simply because, well, I'm both afraid of torps, and I don't want to be sailing in a straight line because I'm perma-spotted and they have a Bismarck somewhere there who could shoot at any point. Angling hard in as the Bismarck shoots. He does hit my stern, and you can see he had no issues penning that pretty much automatically, but the rest of the shells do miss. I'm actually using AP, not HE, which can surprise you. And that's what I mentioned earlier about this AP being extremely good against carriers, because it's so flat, you have such an easy time nailing the Citadel, even at massive ranges. And this Midway, who probably thought he would live a lot longer than he did, ends up being deleted extremely quickly. And now we have the Udaloy and the Bismarck left. I did in fact pop my radar during that fight, and the reason for that was because the Udaloy was hiding behind the island, and I did not want the Udaloy to charge me as I was fighting the Midway, and a good way to scare the crap out of any DD is to pop your radar, because if you get spotted behind an island, the last thing you want to do is charge out behind the island and pick a fight. No, you play it safe, and this guy, he bailed in a panic instead of even getting the idea to rush me. So radar doesn't necessarily have to be a killing tool, it can also be a deterrent. Like, I don't want to pick a fight with that guy because I am radared right now. Finally, we have the Bismarck left. He's giving so much broadside, we of course switch to AP. And we angle. You see how much broadside I'm giving? I want him to shoot that broadside. I want that tanky belt armor to be eating these shells. And I don't want it to go nose in and eat that massive pen, or potential pen. I think he's gonna get one more volley off. But with the way I'm angled, I have 7k health. Secondaries do the most. Oh, he doesn't even actually have a chance, as I deal a 6k AP volley to him, and I do finish him off. And the game does end in a pretty comfortable 211k damage game. I did get a task done. I had a mission. I needed to get 10 Citadels in this game, in a game with a cruiser, so 13 Citadels is more than enough. And I actually get the Kraken there. High Caliber and Dreadnought, tanky and dealt damage, pretty much my favorite rewards when you get them both at the same time, because it tells you have been doing a good job in that sense. Only 13 planes shot down, but then again the carrier was smart enough to avoid me most of the time, except when I actually rushed them down. Team score wise, 3.1k base XP, which I consider pretty good because breaking 3k XP these days, especially in a cruiser when you're not capping anything, can be quite challenging. And I didn't get a single cap this game and I still managed to break 3k, so I considered it a very good game in that sense. Looking at the detailed report, it's not really a surprise that the vast majority of the damage comes from AP. In fact, I love Moskva AP and I use it a ton, and that's why I don't even spec Demolition Expert on my Moskva, because I end up... The AP is kind of the bread and butter of the ship, and the HE is what you use when people angle really sharply against you. Looking at, of course, the detailed or the team play, 26k spotting, not that special. 2.5 million potential, that's of course always nice, that's a lot of tanking done. In fact, damage received, 101,000. So there you can kind of see the reasons why it's considered the battleship Moskva, but keep in mind the angles, Full broadside, you don't have some nice turtleback to protect you, you don't have some angled citadel like the Hindenburg or the Zhao. There's nothing trolley about your armor. If you give good broadside, you will get citadeled, absolutely guaranteed. If you go nose in, you will get overmatched and also citadeled. So keep those things in mind. The ship is tanky, but only when it's played correctly. This ship is extremely picky about your armor angles, and that's why a lot of new players, when they play with Moskva, they think they're so squishy, and then they just explode, and they scratch their heads like, this isn't how I saw it on YouTube, what the hell, what just happened? Anyway, let me show you my recommended build. Note, this is my recommended build for random battles. I will be covering clan war builds later on. Alright, as usual, starting off with the modules, not really much to talk about here. Consumable wise, I recommend at least the premium heal and the premium repair. You have a lot of health pool and a lot of people like spamming HE at you, setting you on fire, so being able to repair those fires is pretty damn important, especially now with the addition of Royal Navy battleships that pretty much will continually keep you on fire all game. Fun times. If you got additional cash to spare, get the premium surveillance radar, or premium surveillance radar and premium defensive AA. I don't recommend hydro because you should rarely, if ever, be in a situation where you need it. Most of the time you should be blapping the DDs from long range with your radar, and very rarely, if ever, should there be a situation where hydro is necessary. For ranked, of course, it's a must-have, but my ranked build will come later. Upgrade-wise, main armaments mod 1 for the turret survivability, since you will be sitting a lot nose in and your turrets will be eating a lot of hits. AA range, once again with the help of AFT you can reach a damn impressive 8.2 on the long range and 5.1 on the mid range. Even the so-called short range is 4.4, so that is a very impressive range on pretty much every single aura. Faster reload on the guns because the default range of 19.4 is more than enough. Radar module, if you have it, 40% to the action time of surveillance radar. This is of course amazingly strong since it transforms your usual 25 second radar into a 35. On my Russian account that I played on earlier, you noticed that I only had a 25 second radar. That's because I don't have this module on the Russian account. On the Russian account I instead run increased defensive AA for that 20% extra action time, since the AA, as I mentioned, is very strong with defensive AA active. So if you have surveillance radar, run that. If you don't have it, run defensive. If you don't have either, I would probably just go for tankiness. Faster rudder shift, even though you sit a lot nose in and so forth, being able to angle quickly when you need to is extremely important, and being able to juke those shells to make sure that they do not hit this huge 25mm nose that is pretty much designed to eat every single shell that comes your way, and if it goes past, well, once it overmatches this, it goes straight into this flat citadel armor here, so that's something you obviously do not want. And finally, concealment, because, well, you already have a pretty damn awful concealment. There's no reason to make it even worse. The rudder shift isn't really worth it because, well, the simple issue that you have right here is that, whoops, let's not try to click the right things here. The simple issue that you have here is that your turning circle is still 760 meters and your ship is absolutely massive. So being able to turn quicker doesn't really help. Cutting this down by 20% doesn't really help you much, in the sense that you're still going to be an absolutely gigantic target when you try to make any sort of turns in this thing. So yeah, just go for the concealment. Being able to disengage when you need to is a lot more important, even if those cases are more rare on this cruiser than on other cruisers, simply because it has such a absurdly terrible concealment. Captain perks wise, priority target, absolute must have, followed by, I'm pretty sure I would go AR next. The turret traverse it's not that good. It's bad enough that I recommend expert marksman, but I think you can get away with getting AR first, especially on the lower tier ones as you're leveling this line. Follow it up with superintendent, additional heal, plus the other amazing consumables, concealment expert, AFT, and vigilance to avoid those torps, and the last 2 points in the faster turret traverse. Now, of course, Clan Wars will be a significantly different build, including, of course, no AFT, but that's something, as I said, I will cover later. Exterior-wise, flags, speed is pretty damn amazing, heal is absolutely a must-have, you are, after all, Battleship Moskva, and of course reduction in fire duration, because when you have a big health pool and fire deals percentage damage, reducing the duration reduces the damage taken by a huge amount. Now, other good things you could run is November Foxtrot, faster consumables, better AA is always nice. I don't really rate the fire chance flags, but you can run them if you really want to minimax, for example for Clan War, something I might highly recommend. But other than that, I just run XP flags on top. Anyway, that was my Moskva commentary. As I mentioned, I will be covering the Hindenburg and the Moskva, making these clan battle bids for them, because that's something I think a lot of people will want, since those cruises will no doubt be very popular. Anyway, that was all from me. I hope you guys enjoyed it.